evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that I found particularly interesting. And this is going to give me an opportunity to talk about two of the best fighters that I've personally ever seen, at least within my generation of watching boxing. Of course, for those of you that don't personally know my age, I'm 23 years old. I was born in 1998, and I started watching boxing throughout the early 2010s. So, of course, I got to see, the likes of Miguel Cotto, Manny Pacquiao, a little bit of Juan Manuel Marquez, and, of course, Floyd Mayweather Jr., but I kind of caught them a little bit near the end of their careers. I still seen them in some very, very decent fights. I seen Manny Pacquiao beat Timothy Bradley in those couple of matches. Personally, in my opinion, I think he beat him in the first one as well, but it is what it is. I seen Floyd Mayweather Jr. against Saul Canelo Alvarez, and I seen him beat Marcos Maidana. And of course, I seen him in that Manny Pacquiao fight and Andre Berto fight as well. I believe I seen Juan Manuel Marquez against that of Timothy Bradley. There was a couple of other fighters, all in all, that I've seen as well. I seen Miguel Cotto in his big fight with Sergio Martinez, and all in all, his fight with Saul Canelo Alvarez as well. But as of right now, in my opinion, and I've said this as a multitude of times, I do believe at the current moment in time that Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, that he is the current number one pound for pound fighter in all of boxing. And not only is he the current number one pound for pound fighter in all of boxing, in my opinion, he is the biggest star. He is the main golden goose in all of boxing. And I think that all of boxing has probably realized that probably for the past several years. And I think that they have had plans with Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez for a very, very, very long time. And I think all in all that the plans for Saul Canelo Alvarez, I think that this next move against Olunga Makabu, I think that more than likely that this was probably planned quite a while ago, to be honest with you. Because Saul Canelo Alvarez in boxing, and this is what happens whenever you have a great asset like a Saul Canelo Alvarez. And what do I mean by a great asset? I'm talking about someone that you can really market to the public. I'm talking about someone that is going to make your sport more lively. And whenever, you have a sport especially, no matter what sport that you're watching, they want you to basically believe, no matter what it is, who you're watching, that at least as they're, if they're great for their era, people want that person to be in the debate as the greatest possible, person for their profession of all time. So if you watch tennis, for example, now I personally do believe that Mr. Novak Djokovic is the greatest men's tennis player, at least that I've seen. But even if you don't personally believe that he is, tennis is going to want you to believe that, or at least that all the three main male competitors as of right now, like a Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic, or Roger Federer, that they are the greatest thing that you have ever seen in the sport of tennis, because that is going to bring more people to the sport of tennis, because it's going to make you feel like you're watching history. It's the same thing with NBA basketball. When Michael Jordan came around, in my opinion, he eventually became the greatest basketball player of all time. But when Kobe Bryant, overall was the most prolific, I don't think that he was the greatest player of the 2000s. I think that was Tim Duncan, personally, to be honest with you. And I think even Shaq was ahead of him. But when Kobe came around, all in all, and he entertained so many people and he had such a big fan base, the NBA media was trying to promote Kobe Bryant as the greatest basketball player of all time. Then after him, LeBron James. And, more than likely after LeBron James, who knows? It'll either be Steph Curry, who may continue on, maybe Kevin Durant, maybe Giannis Antetokounmpo. I would say Kawhi Leonard, but he's shown me within the past couple seasons that he can't necessarily be on that level. So we'll see what happens. But when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter what sport you watch. They always want you to believe that what you're watching is that you're watching the greatest thing that anyone has ever seen in the sport of boxing, or no matter what sport it may be. It's the same thing basically for all sports or whatever profession that you watch. And I do believe that a certain amount of people, especially after Saul Canelo Alvarez gets this cruiserweight win, when it comes down to the overall, or possibly does over that of Olunga Makabu, a certain amount of people are going to take a look at Saul Canelo Alvarez, and they're going to take a look at his record, and they're going to say, wow, this dude, all in all, he was able to basically start off with overall, sorry, let me fast forward that, I accidentally put it back. But anyways, when it comes down to it, they're going to basically say, wow, this man basically was able to win titles all the way at the 154-pound weight class, which is the junior middleweight division, and he was able to go all the way up to 200 pounds and win a title there. There is not a lot of boxers in the history that have been able to do that, and this is why I think this next Olunga Makabu fight is so important for that of Saul Canelo Alvarez, because a certain amount of boxers they're really pissing, and overall they're getting really bitchy about this next fight that Saul Canelo Alvarez has. And there's been a multitude of boxers that have complained about this. Marco Antonio Barrera, and Eric Morales, they've been against Saul Canelo Alvarez for a very long time. And I already know why that is, because they think, overall that the media at least is trying to push him over them. And to be quite honest with you, they would be correct too. Because Saul Canelo Alvarez, he's on another level. He is greater than any of those Mexican fighters, in my opinion. There's only one Mexican fighter that, at least for certain, in my opinion, would maybe be over that of a Saul Canelo Alvarez at this current moment in time, and that would be Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. And there's some that would not even debate him over a Saul Canelo Alvarez. I personally would at the point in time, just because I think that he had a little bit more time in his boxing career, and maybe you could argue that he's a little bit more proven. But Saul Canelo Alvarez is a very, very proven fighter. And the big question is, because there's been a certain amount of conversations of this, especially within the past couple of days, because Floyd Mayweather Jr., all in all, he really has said some stuff on Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez for the past couple of years, especially ever since he has gotten to that number one pound for pound spot. And I think Floyd Mayweather Jr. realizes two things, because I think overall that he has said certain derogatory things about Canelo Alvarez for two things. I think one of the reasons is overall because I think that he wants to stick up for certain fighters that, all in all, he looks at as his proteges, or maybe fighters that he believes he can lure to his stable, maybe like a Terrence Bud Crawford, or maybe overall he wants other fighters that are within his camp, like an Errol Spence Jr. or a Gervonta Tank Davis, to eventually become the number one pound for pound fighter. And of course, if you're promoting Saul Canelo Alvarez as the number one pound for pound fighter, it's going to be very hard for a Gervonta Tank Davis or maybe a Terrence Bud Crawford, who I think he's really trying hard to get over to Showtime, or at least in his stable. When it comes down to it, I think that he sees a lot of himself in those two fighters, and I think that he's trying to help out those two fighters, all in all, by saying that they're the number one pound for pound, or they're overall the biggest stars in boxing, yada, 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 when it comes down to it. And number two, why do I think, all in all, that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is saying certain things about Canelo, like, oh, he was easy work, and yeah, he might beat more champions than me, but all in all, he'd never be as great as me. Why do I think, all in all, he's saying that? Because I think Floyd Mayweather Jr. knows that there is going to be a certain amount of a push by the media if Canelo Alvarez not only gets this cruiserweight win, but if he continues to go on a great winning streak for the next, who the hell knows however long, it could be the next several years, if Canelo Alvarez continues to go on a great winning streak, and if he beats almost every great contender out there, Floyd Mayweather Jr. knows there is going to be a great push for Saul Canelo Alvarez to possibly be not only one of the greatest fighters of all time, but to be the greatest fighter of all time. There is going to be a certain amount of pushes for that for Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez if he is able to continue winning these divisions. If he overall ends up unifying the 175-pound division, I have no doubt about it whatsoever. There's going to be certain people calling Canelo Alvarez the greatest boxer that has ever lived. There are going to be certain people that make those arguments, and they're going to use Canelo to try and put him over Floyd Mayweather Jr. And I think Floyd Mayweather Jr. realizes that, and he says, let's not forget, I ended up getting that victory over Saul Canelo Alvarez when I was 36 years old. Now, when Floyd Mayweather Jr. was 36 years old, he was still pretty much at the best point in his career. So this narrative of, well, Canelo beat him, or, Floyd Mayweather Jr. was able to beat Canelo when he was a grandpa. Floyd was older, but you can tell that that was one of Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s best performances. Now, do I think that it was one of his best performances because I just think Canelo's not on the same level as some of the other fighters that Floyd has fought? No. I think that Canelo Alvarez, to be quite honest with you, I think that Canelo is probably the second greatest fighter that Floyd Mayweather Jr. has ever defeated. Even if Canelo were to retire today, the only fighter that Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought, in my opinion, that was greater than that of a Canelo Alvarez, just because he's been more proven in some of the weight divisions, and he's an 8-weight division champion, of course, has been that of a Manny Pacquiao. But any other fighter that he fought in his career, I don't think that Miguel Cotto, who gave Floyd a tougher fight than Canelo, I don't think that Cotto, even though I think he's a tremendous fighter, I don't think that Miguel Cotto was greater than Canelo. I don't think that Juan Manuel Marquez was greater than Canelo. I don't think that Oscar De La Hoya was greater than Canelo. I don't think that Sugar Shane Mosley was greater than Canelo. I don't think that any of these fighters, who are pretty much the greatest fighters that Floyd Mayweather Jr. has ever fought, all fantastic wins, I don't think any of these guys are above Saul Canelo Alvarez. I don't think any of them are. And when it comes down to it, all in all, so Floyd Mayweather Jr. can say that it was easy work all he wants to, and it was a very great performance. But at the end of the day, Saul Canelo Alvarez has really transitioned into one of the all-time great boxers, in my opinion. Now, if we're also going to talk about the narrative about certain Saul Canelo Alvarez fans saying, oh, well, Floyd only beat him because he was too green and all this other stuff. Well, Saul Canelo Alvarez, he was highly experienced. At that time, he already had, I believe, about 30 or 40 something professional fights. So it's not like Saul Canelo Alvarez did not have any experience. So it would be wrong, per se, in my opinion, to say that Saul Canelo Alvarez was too green. But this is also my opinion as well. It also would be an incorrect statement to say that Canelo Alvarez is the exact same fighter that he was back then that he is now. Because I don't think that that's true at all. I think that Canelo Alvarez has adjusted as a fighter. I do believe that Saul Canelo Alvarez has become a greater fighter. And the big question overall, just in terms of the big picture, just talking about his future and where people may rank him, do I believe that Canelo Alvarez has a legitimate chance of maybe surpassing that of a Floyd Mayweather Jr. in that of boxing history? What I'll say is this. I don't think that Saul Canelo Alvarez is ever going to definitively surpass that of a Floyd Mayweather Jr., but I do think that he may have a chance to at least be somewhat in the conversation. So what do I mean by that? That he at least overall has room in the top 10 boxers of all time. Because there's many people that would call Floyd Mayweather Jr. the greatest of all time. There's also many people that would debate him with Muhammad Ali, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Lennox Lewis, Rocky Marciano, Carlos Monsoon, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., Sugar Ray Robinson, those type of fighters. Do I think that Canelo Alvarez, Roy Jones Jr. as well, let me not forget him, because in my opinion, he gets left out of those conversations quite a bit because of what happened to him at the end of his career. But Roy Jones Jr., in my opinion, does deserve room in that conversation. At the end of the day, and Manny Pacquiao, let me not forget him. At the end of the day, you can put whoever fighters on and all that you want to in the top 10, and there may have been a couple of that I forgot personally, like maybe a Sam Langford or a Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. But at the end of the day, Saul Canelo Alvarez knows that if he overall is able to beat a lot of these top contenders, and if he is able to win that championship, especially at a fifth weight class in that cruiserweight division, it is going to be looked at as a complete game changer. And who knows, maybe later on, if Saul Canelo Alvarez, if he really overall does want to become a champion in a six weight class, he may even try to go all the way up to heavyweight if he sees an opportunity there. But I don't know, all in all, if he would fight someone like Alexander Usyk or, a Tyson Fury necessarily, because I think those guys not only are very, very skilled, but they just might be a little bit too big for him. So it is what it is. But we'll see overall what happens eventually. But I do believe that Saul Canelo Alvarez, he is making certain strategic moves, but I do believe all in all that they are the right moves. And like I said, I cannot call Canelo Alvarez someone that is just ducking high-grade competition, because Saul Canelo Alvarez, he just fought 3 decent champions within the past year. He fought Callum Smith, whether you want to say he was coming off of a bad performance or not. At the end of the day, he was, I believe, the Super WBA champion, and he was the Ring Magazine champion for 168. Canelo Alvarez beat him. He beat Caleb Plant, who was a very talented IBF champion. And then on top of that, he beat Billy Joe Saunders, who I believe was the WBO champion. So at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez got through the 168-pound division. His next fight is going to be over a cruiserweight in Ilunga Makabu. And all in all, I think that that is the correct move. And after that, from what I hear, he more than likely is going to face that of a Joe Smith Jr. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, let's get into the conversation. Dante's Boxing Nation is going to talk about it. Let's tune in.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? Since no one is reporting these type of things, you really need to pay attention to what's going on in the sport of boxing right now. We've seen ESPN put a graphic up, had Lomachenko as undefeated. They didn't just put this graphic up once, they put this up on 2 different occasions. And now Showtime removes the biggest fight that Canelo was ever involved in, which is the Mayweather versus Canelo Alvarez fight. They removed it from their YouTube channel. They also removed the All Access series as well. So the question is, why would Showtime do something like this? And who would that benefit for them to take that fight down? The only person that would really benefit is Canelo Alvarez personally.
Well, the people that it would benefit is not only Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, but whoever overall is in charge of him or whatever company he works for. Once again, like I said, there is going to be, and I can basically see the plans that they have for Saul Canelo Alvarez, because Saul Canelo Alvarez, you can just tell when you watch him, he is on another level. It is what it is. People can deny it all they want to, but he is not only the clear number one pound for pound boxer as of right now, he is the golden goose and the face of boxing. Like I said, when I watch Canelo Alvarez and when I watch the reception that he gets is almost exactly like what Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr. were. He is almost, I'm not going to quite compare him to that level as of yet, but he gets quite a bit overall of views, no doubt about it. Like I said, he just had a fight against Caleb Plant and got 900,000 pay-per-view buys. There is no other boxer on the planet Earth right now. I'm talking about active boxers that are still in their prime, not Floyd Mayweather or not Manny Pacquiao, who are like 43, 44 years old, maybe doing exhibitions later on down the line. I'm talking about an active boxer that can fight legitimate contenders and all in all still do those numbers. Now, if Floyd came back and fought an actual contender, could he still do those numbers? Yeah, probably. But I don't think that he's going to come back to professional boxing. I think that he only wants to do exhibitions, and I don't have a problem with that. But when it comes down to it, like I said, I think the reason why they removed the Canelo Alvarez-Mayweather fight is because, like I said, they are going to try and overall put Canelo Alvarez in that greatest of all time conversation. They're going to try to put him there. They are going to try to put him there, in my opinion. Will he get there? We'll see what happens. But like I said, so will Canelo Alvarez. He said that at the end of his career, he wants his name to be remembered with the Muhammad Ali's, the Mayweathers, and all that other stuff. And do I believe that he has a chance at that? He certainly does have a chance at that.
But you can't change history. Canelo, he already got dominated by Floyd Mayweather, and nothing is going to change. I mean, seriously, guys.
I agree all in all that nothing is going to change the fact that Canelo ended up getting outperformed by Mayweather, and quite dominantly. But when it comes down to it, I can understand maybe why they removed it from their network, especially if they're trying to lure Canelo Alvarez into signing a Showtime deal. Like I said, there is no superstar overall that is bigger than that of a Canelo Alvarez in boxing right now. And Canelo Alvarez, just like any other superstar in whatever sport, he's a great asset. Meaning what? That he earns a lot of dollars, he earns a lot of green. So when it comes down to it, if, like I said, depending on the sport that you watch, people want you to believe, or, the company, man, they want you to believe, all in all, that whatever you're watching is the greatest thing that you've ever seen, whether you believe that it is or not. So, like I said, they are going to try to promote that. So I understand why they're trying to do that, because basically, all in all, what they're going to try to promote that is that basically, yeah, well, Canelo, he lost to Mayweather, but he lost to him when he was 23 years old. All that is in the past. Canelo Alvarez is the number one pound-for-pound fighter. Now, whether you think that that is a legitimate narrative or not, that's up to you. In my opinion, I think Floyd Mayweather Jr. still beat Canelo when he was an A-grade fighter, and I think all in all that victory does count for a lot. But what I will say is this: do I think that Canelo Alvarez still clearly is a greater fighter at this point in time in his career than what he was back then? Yes, I think so.
Can you think of...
That doesn't mean that I would favor this version of Canelo over the best version of Mayweather. But when it comes down to what that does mean is that I do believe that Canelo has become a greater fighter ever since that Mayweather fight. Because I think that he was in his prime when he fought Mayweather, but I don't know if he was really at his peak. I think when I take a look at Canelo Alvarez right now, he's at his 100% absolute peak. I don't think that there's any question about it, because he's been there, done that against real A-grade fighters when it comes down to that. And, I mean, he's about as experienced as you can get. He's been in those big generational fights like against Lara and Golovkin and was able to pull out against them. Danny Jacobs and a couple of others. And Canelo has been able to pull through.
One good reason why they would remove the Mayweather versus Canelo Alvarez fight from their YouTube channel? There's no way you can explain that.
Well, it's not necessarily all in all. There's no way that you can explain it. Like I said, they're going to try to push Canelo Alvarez as the greatest boxer of all time later on if he continues going on this streak. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. That's why they more than likely remove that fight. Because if Canelo signs a fight, if he signs with a Showtime deal, and Mayweather is still a great asset as well, even though he's still retired. Because if you have all-time great, boxers that are maybe promoters or, maybe they're there for just, kind of like a mascot almost sort of say. I don't know if I want to say that, but, you have certain people like Bernard Hopkins or Oscar De La Hoya that, they're at certain fights, but they're there to attract maybe certain customers and certain boxing names. But when it comes down to it all in all, Floyd is still a great face of boxing. But when it comes down to it, as of right now, just out of any active boxer, so Canelo Alvarez, when it comes down to it, he is the face of boxing. It's kind of like the Michael Jordan, LeBron James situation. I believe indefinitely that Michael Jordan is greater than LeBron James. But the NBA, once again, they want you to believe that LeBron James is at least somewhat in that conversation with Michael Jordan. So that's why you have all these narratives out here that, oh, well, Michael Jordan is great, but he didn't have as many assists and the rebounds as LeBron. Whether they truly believe or not that LeBron James is as great as Michael Jordan, they need you to believe in that conversation. They need you to believe that there is a conversation. It was the same thing with Kobe Bryant. They'll show Kobe Bryant, all in all, during the 2000s and 2010s, they'll show you overall his victories over the Boston Celtics in the 2010 series. They'll show you his victory over the Orlando Magic with the Dwight Howard, Magic in 2009. But the one series that almost never comes up is that one 2004 loss where Kobe Bryant was pretty damn horrific in that series, to be quite honest with you, against the Detroit Pistons. So I think the same thing is going on here.
You see, old media, they want Canelo to be something that he's not. They want him to be this undefeated, dominant champion, pound for pound. They want him to be, once again, the non-black version of...
No, he's not undefeated, but he is a dominant champion that's pound for pound. And I think it's time that you realize that. And to be quite honest with you, Dante, I think that you have realized that. And I think that's a big part of the reason why you have tore him down so often. Because you would not be tearing him down so as often as you do if you did not truly believe that Canelo Alvarez had some sort of star power or all in all was a decent threat. Now, do I think that maybe he's a decent threat to Mayweather? We'll see. I'm not necessarily sure about that. I think that it's very hard to surpass that of a Floyd Mayweather Jr. But these guys realize that, Canelo, he's what's up. He's on the next level.
Floyd Mayweather. They want it to look as if Canelo Alvarez is undefeated, like Floyd Mayweather is still today. But Canelo Alvarez can't be a Floyd Mayweather if he doesn't get in the ring with the same level of opposition that Floyd Mayweather was in the ring with.
Right, but it's hard to do that. And I'm not saying that, what I'll say is this. It's hard to do that because I don't know if even if he were to face Charlo and Andrade and David Benavidez, does anyone really look at those fighters because this is the narratives that, these guys always try to promote. Well, what all-time great fighters has Canelo Alvarez really beat? Well, let's just ask ourselves this question. I mean, even if we want to take a look at other resumes, other all-time great fighters, let's take a look at Andre Ward. Has Andre Ward really defeated any of the top 50 boxers of all time? Not really. Is Carl Frost really one of the top, best 50 boxers of all time? No. Is Sergey Kovalev? Is Chad Dawson? Is Mikhail Kessler? None of those guys are top 50 boxers of all time. They're decently great for their day, so we have to kind of look at it and say, especially if they're as dominant as they are, that, they pretty much beat whoever, they needed to. As of right now, Canelo, in my opinion, he's beating who he kind of needs to. Now, of course, the Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, David Benavidez fights, in my opinion, those do need to happen eventually. But if Canelo, goes after 175 and faces people like a Joe Smith, and then especially after that an Artur Beterbiev and that of a, Dimitri Bivol, those are fantastic fights.
You know what all of the greatest fighters of all time have in common? They all won the most important fight of their career. Even when some of them lost.
Well, I agree with you. And that's why I think Canelo Alvarez, at least as of yet, I think that he is one of the greatest boxers that I have seen. But I can't necessarily put him on that top 10 level as of yet because I need to see it, I need to see it continue. What does it mean to be a top 10 boxer of all time? You not only need to do it for a certain amount of time, but you have to do it consistently. That's why Vasyl Lomachenko right now, like I said, we're going to really figure out, especially if he gets that title shot over George Kambosos, we're going to really truly figure out how great he really is. Because right now, I think Vasyl Lomachenko is a great boxer. I just can't put him on the all-time great level. Because I think that he had a very good stretch, very dominant stretch for about 2 to 3 years. But that loss to Teofimo Lopez really lost him a lot of steam. So the question is, can Vasyl Lomachenko bounce back? We'll see what happens because certain boxers in their career, they can bounce back. Bernard Hopkins and Tommy Hearns, for example, they bounced back. They were able to bounce back from their losses. Miguel Cotto and Sugar Shane Mosley a little bit here and there were able to bounce back from their losses. So the big question is Vasyl Lomachenko on their level, or all in all, is he another Gamble Rigondeaux? A person now is a great boxer, but you want to put him in their, in the top 50 boxers of all time or anything. It just is what it is. Saul Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, he's a level above those fighters.
They ran it right back and won the rematch, or they won the best of 3.
Saul Canelo Alvarez has done that against Gennady Golovkin. So I don't know what you're complaining about.
Like Ali Frazier and Leonard versus Duran. Canelo Alvarez's biggest claim to fame is losing to Floyd Mayweather.
Right, but Dante, come on, we can claim this with a lot of fighters. You're a person that likes to put Bernard Hopkins debatably in the top 10 of all time. And once again, this is just my personal opinion. Bernard Hopkins is the most overrated boxer of all time. I don't even know if it's close. I don't know really, besides Felix Tito Trinidad and Oscar De La Hoya, who pretty much were heavily outsized by Bernard Hopkins, I don't know one other A-grade fighter that he really defeated in his career that was similar in size. Like every time Bernard Hopkins went up in weight and fought someone that was similar in physical dimensions, he usually lost. That's why the only middleweight that he really fought that was worth a damn in Jermaine Taylor and could overall compete with him in terms of physical dimensions and skill set, he lost both of those fights. You know, he also lost to Chad Dawson twice, I believe, you know, or at least once. He lost to Joe Calzaghe, clearly, you know, when it comes down to it. And I'm trying to think of who else, you know. I can't remember. Now, Bernard Hopkins was an all-time great fighter, don't get me wrong. He beat Tito Trinidad. He beat Oscar, who, I mean, he never should have been in that weight class anyway, but it is what it is. He also was able to beat Jean Pascal. He was able to beat Antonio Tarver. So it's, you know, it's not like Bernard Hopkins wasn't a great fighter. He was. But when people try to put him on the top 10 level, it's just ridiculous. It's just stupid. Because it's like, how do you put a guy like that on the top 10 level of all time? Because really, to be quite honest with you, when he fought people that were the majority similar in size, he usually lost the majority of the big fights in his career. It just is what it is. You know, like Bernard Hopkins and Tommy Hearns, in my opinion, they're on a very similar level. Like, people always like to you know, talk shit about how Tommy Hearns is this all-time great. Tommy Hearns was an all-time great fighter, don't get me wrong. Tommy Hearns was a dude that the majority of the time, he lost the biggest fights in his career. So it's like, what? I don't understand how people, they talk the same shit about Canelo, but then they'll take a look at Tommy Hearns and Bernard Hopkins or some of these other fighters that lost almost every single one of the big fights in their career, and somehow they're counted within like the top 20 of all time. Like, it's just, you know, it baffles me.
Once again,
and don't get me wrong, both Bernard Hopkins and Tommy Hearns, they're all-time great fighters. They're not top 10, they're not top 20.
And he never ran that right back. He couldn't run it back because the fight wasn't even competitive. But he also never even asked for a rematch on top of all of that. Canelo, he waited for Floyd Mayweather to...
Right, but Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler, they had a match. I thought Sugar Ray Leonard completely beat Marvin Hagler. I thought that he easily won 8 rounds to 4. Does that mean that Marvin Hagler does not deserve his place in history as one of the greatest fighters of all time? It just is what it is.
Be retired and long gone to now, once again, repeat the Canelo fans' talking points. And man, if it was now, if we fought now, it would be a complete different fight. This is what I mean when I tell you guys Canelo Alvarez is pound for pound the best fantasy fighter in the world. If you listen to the...
No, he's not the number one pound for pound fantasy fighter in the world. He is the number one pound for pound fighter in the world because there's no other boxer in the world right now, active boxer, that has done what he's done. So it is what it is. But do I agree with Dante a little bit that, you know, maybe if the rematch happened now, this version of Canelo would beat up Floyd Mayweather Jr.? Well, there's no way to constitute that because I don't think that rematch is ever going to happen. Now, maybe if Floyd fought him today, yeah, he'd probably lose because he's about 45 years old, or 44, however old he is. But Saul Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, even for how skilled he is, I don't know, like, if the best version of Floyd and the best version of Canelo would have fought, and I think that Canelo was near his best when he fought Floyd, I just don't think that he was at his absolute peak. I think right now Canelo's at his absolute peak. But I still probably would favor Floyd just by a little bit, just because Floyd and Canelo, they actually fight very similarly in certain standards. Both of them are very, very slick. They both rely a hell of a lot on very decent timing and great counter-punching ability. And I just don't think Canelo Alvarez, I think that he's a little bit too big. And I think all in all that, I think that he would try to outbox Floyd. And I don't think overall that that's the way to beat Floyd. I think if you're going to beat Floyd, you actually have to be a little bit more speedier and you have to be more his same size. But that doesn't mean that Saul Canelo Alvarez is not an all-time great fighter. I just don't know if he has the right type of style to beat Floyd because I think that Canelo has a very similar style to Floyd, and Floyd, all in all, I just think that he's quicker with his feet, and I think overall that he's quicker with his hand speed, and I think that, you know, when the quicker the feet you have, the better that you can get in and out of the range. So I think that Floyd probably always would have had that advantage over Canelo Alvarez, but that doesn't mean that Saul Canelo Alvarez is not an all-time great fighter in his own right.
Canelo fans, they'll tell you that Canelo Alvarez, he beats all of these guys that Canelo won't fight, but he'll beat them all easy. Charlo, Andre, Benavidez, and everybody at 175. Man, if he beat all those guys, there would be no doubt that Canelo would be pound for pound the best fighter in the world, right? But that's...
Well, allegedly, he's going to go after 175 after this, and I'm going to be very interested to see what you have to say, because I reviewed a video that overall seen Dante's Boxing Nation say that Canelo overall, if he were to face the 175 pounders, even Joe Smith Jr., that it's a very talented division. So let's see if Dante keeps his word. I highly doubt it, because he almost never does, but we'll see what happens.
That's the reason why he's the fantasy pound for pound. Because in fantasy matches, Canelo Alvarez, he's unbeatable, he's undefeated, he's the most dominant fighter in boxing. But the reality is...
I agree. It's the same thing with Gervonta Tank Davis and Terrence Bud Crawford. This dude has allegedly been the number one pound-for-pound fighter from Dante's Boxing Nation, Terrence Bud Crawford, and the biggest win of his career is over that of a Sean Porter. And Sean Porter, by the time Terrence Crawford beat him, he already had 3 losses in his career and had no belt. So, I mean, come on. Canelo at least is facing guys that have belts. So it is what it is. And Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, and Billy Joe Saunders, whether you want to put them on the same level as Andre and Jamal Charlo or not, personally, this is my personal opinion. I don't know if Billy Joe Saunders, like, let's just say him, I don't know if he personally beats overall that of a Demetrius Andre, but I think that at his prime, I think he very potentially could have especially beat Jamal Charlo, because Charlo, he does not handle overall, slickness very well. Go ahead and take a look at his fights against Julian J. Rock Williams and Matt Korobov.
Ever since Canelo Alvarez lost the...
But of course, just because one boxer beats one, that doesn't mean that Canelo Alvarez wouldn't have a tougher matchup against Jamal Charlo, because once again, styles make fights, but this is my personal opinion. I don't think Jamal Charlo's style, I don't think that it's going to suit well for Canelo. What I mean by that is that I don't think that his style is, I don't think that it's going to beat Canelo. Because I think Jamal Charlo, I think that he's going to try to outbox Canelo. He's not known for really throwing a great amount of volume punches. And I don't think that if you're the same size as Canelo, I don't think you can outbox him. I don't think that you can. Maybe Andre can, because he can get out of the zone, in and out of the zone, somewhat quicker than that of a Jamal Charlo. And all in all, he has better head movement. But even Demetrius Andre, in my opinion, I would not give a great chance, because he just gets hit a little bit too often. His chin sometimes is a little bit too much in the air. He's not necessarily A+ defensively when it comes down to it. And on top of that, sometimes he just gets a little bit too sloppy. But it is what it is.
Floyd Mayweather, he hasn't fought any undefeated black slick fighters, like a Charlo or Demetrius Andre. And now he...
That's the thing, though. I never understood this narrative. Jamal Charlo is not a slick fighter. I don't know where people overall are getting this narrative. Jamal Charlo is not a slick fighter. He's not a slick fighter. It just is what it is. And the slick fighter that Canelo has fought, even if you want to talk about black slick fighters, besides Mayweather, he's defeated. He beat Austin Trout. He beat Araceli Lara. He got those victories. It is what it is. And in my opinion, Araceli Lara, he's probably a decent amount more slick than what Andre or Charlo ever were. It just is what it is.
Won't even fight.
Now, once again, that is, of course, that is not me saying that. I would not like to see those fights. Of course I would. But at the end of the day, Canelo has his own accomplishments. It is what it is.
Undefeated Mexican fighters like David Benavidez. The truth is, if Canelo Alvarez really felt that he was a much better fighter from the time that he lost to Floyd Mayweather, he would be aggressively going after fighters like Andre, like Charlo.
I was eating because I was stressed out, candy bars and chips and donuts, gaining weight.
But instead, he's aggressively going after fighters like Macaboo, Billy Joe Saunders, Plant, Smith, Rocky Fielding, Yildirim.
Right, but Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, and Callum Smith, all those guys are A-grade fighters. It just is what it is.
At the end of the day,
you don't have to compare them to the same level as a Miguel Cotto or Juan Manuel Marquez or anything like that. But at the end of the day, they're still A-grade fighters. But this is also the thing for me. I don't think that Charlo or Andre or Benavidez are on those levels either. I mean, even if Canelo were to beat Benavidez or Charlo or Demetrius Andre, is anyone going to say, wow, that was really a great win because those guys are on the same level as Marquez or Cotto? No one's going to say that. I mean, don't get me wrong. Those guys are great fighters in their own right. They are. And once again, I would still love to see those fights. But I don't get this narrative. Like I said, it's just them trying to tear Canelo down because that's always someone's point. That's always the casual dumbass fan's point whenever they want to tear a fighter down. Well, how many all-time great wins did they really get? Because I seen the same shit with Floyd Mayweather Jr. when people were trying to tear him down. Well, yeah, Floyd has wins over Manny Pacquiao and Miguel Cotto and stuff like that, but, he's not as great as Sugar Ray Leonard because, his wins aren't as great as like the Marvin Hagler win and Tommy Hearns win. Well, at the end of the day, we have to give Floyd Mayweather Jr. credit for defeating the fighters of his generation. It just is what it is. All right? It's the same thing with Canelo.
It doesn't matter how much old media is trying to protect or help Canelo Alvarez. The one thing they cannot do is make Canelo Alvarez a better fighter. But they understand that. You see, they understand a lot of these boxers that they are trying to protect, like Oscar Valdez, like a Teofimo, a George Kambosos, a Canelo Alvarez. They know that these fighters most likely won't beat the fighters on the coincidental list.
I hate to tell you this, Dante, but Canelo Alvarez has almost beaten almost every type of style out there. He's beaten Lara, he's beaten Golovkin, and a couple of those you can argue were controversial, but at the end of the day, Canelo was able to pull through. He beat Austin Trout, he beat Danny Jacobs, he beat Billy Joe Saunders, he beat Caleb Plant, Sergey Kovalev, Callum Smith. He's gonna go after this dude Olunga Makabu next, who of course I don't believe is A grade, but I understand why Canelo is going after the fight. So it just is what it is. So Dante, I understand the point a little bit about Oscar Valdez and, George Kambosos, but once again, Canelo is not any of those fighters. None of those fighters are on the Canelo Alvarez level. It just is what it is. Because none of them have the big wins, the gravity of wins that Saul Canelo Alvarez has. Once again, Canelo has a win over Gennady Golovkin, who at one point in time was ranked within the top 5 pound for pound. On top of that, he beat Araceli Lara, who would have been at the time probably top 20 pound for pound debatably. At one point in time, top 20 pound for pound. All right? He beat Sergey Kovalev when he probably would have been top 20, top 25 pound for pound. He beat Caleb Plant. He beat Callum Smith. He beat Billy Joe Saunders. All these guys are great fighters. A lot of these guys were undefeated champions. Or if they weren't undefeated champions, they were pretty much at the best point in their career. So it's not like when Terrence Bud Crawford, when he fought like Amir Khan and fucking Kell Brook, when those guys were, they had no belts to see. And on top of that, those guys, they pretty much were washed up.
Shakur Stevenson, a Devin Haney, a Charlo, an Andre. So what they do, once again, is they go ahead and they call Canelo Alvarez pound for pound the best fighter in the world when he's not fighting anyone.
He is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. He is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. And you can claim all that bullshit all you want to, but at the end of the day, he is the number one pound for pound fighter in the world. It just is what it is, until proven otherwise.
The fact that he was able to avoid fighting the guys that would have beat him, or at least some of the guys that would have beat him, that's enough for them to call him pound for pound the best fighter in the world. This is why they call Kambosos undisputed right now.
That's why some of them do. But of course, George Kambosos, he's not undisputed. Once again, George, I understand Dante's point when it comes down to it. I get it, but there's a reason why I review these videos. Because if you're new to boxing and if you fall into this stupid, over-emotional pro-black cult bullshit, then you'll believe a lot of this bullshit that Dante spreads. Now, is there some truth to this? Do I believe all in all that there are certain fighters that are being protected from black fighters? Most certainly. Do I think all in all that there are certain fighters being promoted over other fighters, all-time great black fighters or certain black fighters that are active today just because they're trying to put other demographics out there more into the limelight? Yes, certainly. But if you're trying to make the point that the only reason why Saul Canelo Alvarez or someone maybe like a Vasily Lomachenko or an Alexander Usyk or Tyson Fury, the only reason why they're ranked so highly in their careers is because they have the complexion for the protection, all that is horseshit. Because we can take a look at every single one of those fighters. Every single one of those fighters has debatably a top 10 pound for pound win in their career. So it just is what it is. They're proven fighters.
They're telling him.
Now, once again, if you're talking about someone like a Naoya Inoue, that's a completely different situation. Because that's a person that is not highly proven. He's proven overall to be a good fighter. But we don't really know how great he is because who has he really fought? It just is what it is.
You don't have to risk losing to Devin Haney. As long as you stay away from him, we could call you the best in the division. But if you mess around and get in a ring with him, you're going to lose to him. And we can no longer call you the best in the division. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out.
But anyways, that's really about it for this video. I just thought that I would talk about that because I thought that that would be a very interesting point to talk about, an interesting point to make. But do I believe that at the end of his career that Saul Canelo Alvarez will surpass Floyd Mayweather Jr.? What I'll say is this. I'm not 100% sure if he's ever going to 100% surpass Floyd Mayweather Jr., but what I do believe is that maybe at the end of his career, he at least is going to have a conversation in that top 10 pound for pound. So we'll see overall what happens. And I'm talking about top 10 pound for pound of all time. But in my opinion, for that to happen, he is going to have to defeat every and all contenders out there. Not only including the light heavyweights, but probably David Benavidez, Charlo, and Andrade as well. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.